Let's continue taking a look at the new precons from the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set with the Food and Fellowship deck. Now, this deck is focused around tokens, specifically food tokens and hobbits. So let's take a look and see what we can do with this deck to make it just a little bit better. Food and Fellowship is a green, white, and black deck that is headed up by either two different pairs of partner commanders. The first pairing is Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit, and Samwise, Loyal Attendant. So let's take a look at the pairing here. Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit, for a white and a black, you get a Halfling Scout, a 1/3 with partner with Sam, Loyal Attendant. It has a Vigilance, and whenever Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit attacks, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, which is key because that's what food gives you, the ring tempts you. And then if Frodo is your ring bearer and the ring has tempted you 2 or more times this game, draw a card. And then on the flip side of this is Sam, Loyal Attendant. For 1 green white, you get a 2/4 Halfling Peasant with partner with Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, create a food token. Activated abilities of foods you control cost 1 less to activate. So instead of having to pay 2 and tap and sacrifice it, you pay 1 tap and sacrifice to get your food tokens to go off. So they go off a little bit easier. You can gain the 3 life, and then so basically you go beginning of combat, create a food token, go to combat, sacrifice, and then you can turn around and be like, okay, Frodo is going to be like attacking. You get 3 more life, the ring will tempt, and then if you've already done it twice already, you're going to get the card off of Frodo as well. There's just a lot of little interactions that work really well with this combination. The other partner pair that you could do with this deck is Merry, Warden of Isengard, and Pippin, Warden of Isengard. Let's take a look at Merry first. For 1, a green and a white, you get a 1/4 Halfling Advisor that partners with Pippin, Warden of Isengard. Whenever 1 or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. This triggers only once each turn. And then Pippin's side of the equation is for a black and a green, you get a 2/2 Halfling Advisor with partner with Merry, Warden of Isengard. 1, tap, create a food token, or tap and sacrifice 4 foods. Other creatures you control get +3/+3 and gain haste until end of turn. Activate only as a sorcery. So it has a little bit of you can create tokens off of it, which then gives you a soldier token, which then eventually will spread out wide for you. And then once you have enough tokens for food, you sacrifice those and you get like a mini overrun effect to smash your opponents with Pippin's abilities. So either way, you could go with this, but I'm going to stick with the Frodo and Sam combination because I think they flow just a little bit better with what's going on in the deck. As with the Riders of Rohan deck, we're going to go with the cuts first. And one of them is actually a popular card online right now where people are kind of trying to build around it just because it's kind of funny to build with. And that is Bilbo Birthday Celebrant. For a white, a black, and a green, you get a 2/3 Halfling Rogue that says if you would gain life, you gain that much life +1 instead. And to pay 2 colorless, a white, a black, and a green, and tap and exile Bilbo, search your library for any number of creature cards, put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate only if you have 111 or more life. This is funny because this references the fact that this, in the story, it is Bilbo's 111th birthday. And, while that's funny, if you have 111 life, you're probably going to win the game anyways. On top of that, Bilbo's ability doesn't really feed well into what we're doing with the deck. Yes, you would gain 1 more life on your foods and stuff like that, but it's going to take you a very, very long time to hit 111 life if that's all the life gain you have in the deck are food tokens. So in the end, this card has a more dedicated deck to be built around it rather than trying to shoehorn it into this deck and use it with the other cards. And for that reason, I'm going to cut it out of here. The next card I'm going to cut is Hithlane Rope. For 2 colorless, you get an artifact that cannot be sacrificed. Pay 1 and tap it. Search for a basic land card in your library. Put it on the battlefield. Tap, shuffle. Give the Hithlane Rope to the player on your right. Or pay 2, tap, draw a card, and then same thing, you give it to the player on your right. I'm not a big fan of giving my opponents things if it's, unless there's some other benefit for me out of it in the long run. I don't want it to pass all the way around the table unless I'm playing it in a group hug deck. This would be great in a group hug deck, but this is not a group hug deck. So for that end, I'm not going to run it in this one. The other sub-theme in this deck is Tree Folk, and I'm actually cutting quite a bit of them out of the deck because they're slow as all get out. This is Great Oak Guardian. For 5 and a green, it's a 4/5 Tree Folk with Flash and Reach. And when it enters the battlefield, creatures target player controls gets +2/+2 until end of turn, untap them. So you get a little bit of a combat surprise here, like you can flash it in and smash an extra 2 damage on all your stuff, or ambush somebody's attacking forces into this stuff. but I'm not a huge fan of this for the cost. For 6 mana, it's just there's better 6 mana creatures in the thing, and the Tree Folk are not compelling enough to include in the deck. Another older artifact that I'm going to chop out of here is Pristine Talisman. 3 colorless, tap, add a colorless to your mana pool, and you gain 1 life. For 3 colorless and only being able to tap for colors, it's not good enough in modern day Commander. You need to at least have some kind of color coming off of your mana rocks if it's going to cost 3, and it needs to do more than just gain you 1 life. So for that reason, I'm kicking it out of the deck. Another Tree Folk that I'm giving in the boot here is Orchard Strider. For 4 green, you get a Tree Folk. It's a 6/4 that says when it enters the battlefield, create 2 food tokens, and it has basic land cycling for 1 and a green. So again, the Tree Folk cost a lot for what they are. 6/4 for 6 by itself isn't that great. Creating 2 food tokens is okay, but we have a lot of other food creation stuff in the deck, and the basic land cycling really doesn't justify including it in the deck, and I'm just going to give it the punt for that. The last Tree Folk I'm kicking out of the deck here is Generous Ent. For 5 and a green, you get a 5/7 Tree Folk with Reach that when it enters the battlefield, create a food token, and it has Forest Cycling 1. Generous Ent is part of a cycle of cards that are in these precons where they have Forest Cycling, Island Cycling, you name either whatever the theme color is, and they're overcosted for what they are to hardcast as a spell. So you're almost pretty much just running them as a mana fix to go Forest Cycling, and you can go get, non-basic lands if they have a forest type with this card, but that's not enough reason for me to want to run this card. And even if I were to run it, I'm rarely ever going to hardcast it for much of anything because it just doesn't do enough for the deck. And in the same vein, we have the Plane Cycling variant of that cycle, Eagles of the North. 5 and a white, 3/3 Bird Soldier, flying. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+0 and first strike until end of turn, and it has Plane Cycling 1. Same concept. I'm not paying 6 for a 3/3 flyer. I'm also not really paying that much mana for a +1/+0 first strike boost for my battlefield when I have access to other things like Pippin's ability to give +3/+3 if I want it. And there's other better pump things that enter the battlefield that we can get into the deck if we want to. And for that reason, I'm cutting the card. So those are the cuts I'm going to make in the deck. Now, what are we adding into the deck? Let's take a look and let's start with some of the new cards from the actual main set to see what we can put in here to make this deck a little bit better. First thing is another variation of Sam. It's Samwise Gamgee. For a green and a white, you get a 2/2 Halfling Peasant that says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token. And then sacrifice 3 foods, return target historic card from your graveyard to your hand. So if your other legendary creatures or some artifacts, or even if you're running some kind of sagas in this deck, you can go ahead and get them back by sacking 3 foods. And we have lots of ways of making food in this deck, so you're going to get some mileage out of that return target historic part, and you're going to get lots of foods off of Samwise himself. So for that reason, I want to put it in the deck because it synergizes very well with what we want to do with this. Speaking of synergies, we also have Peregrine Took.
Fool of a Took.
For 2 and a green, you get a 2/3 Halfling Citizen that says if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, and it doesn't matter what kind of tokens, creature, food, treasure, clue, whatever, those tokens plus an additional food token are created instead, and sacrifice 3 foods to draw a card. So if you really don't need the life gain off of those food tokens and you don't really have a reason to pop them for that, go ahead and sack them to this and get some card draw out of Peregrine here. I'm also going to include Peregrine's partner in crime, Mariotic Brandybuck. For 1 and a green, you get a 2/2 Halfling Citizen that says whenever 1 or more halflings you control attack a player, create a food token. So what you've got to do here is you swing into your multiple opponents and you get food tokens across the board. And most of the creatures in this deck are halflings, so we have good reason to use this card. In sticking with our tokens theme for the deck, we have a new card coming out of the set that's actually in black. It's Lobelia Sackville Baggins. For 2 and a black, you get a 2/3 Halfling Citizen with Flash and Menace that says whenever it enters the battlefield, exile target creature card from an opponent's graveyard that was put there this turn, and then create X treasure tokens where X is the exiled card's power. So if you're able to kill a creature on your opponent's side of the board, whether it's in combat or a removal spell, and then flash this thing in, you're going to get a bunch of treasures off of whatever that creature happens to be. So like if you take out, a 5/5 or a 6/6 or something like that, you're going to get 6 treasure tokens off of this. And then if you have the other things that give you extra tokens and things like that, you're going to get a token overload really quick. Here we have a unthemed board sweep for the deck. The Battle of Bywater. For 1 white, you get a sorcery that says destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater and then create a food token for each creature you control. Well, most of the stuff in our deck is either little token stuff that's going to be ancillarily generated off of our other stuff going off, or it's going to be the little hobbits that are like, 1 and 2 power creatures for the most part anyways. So in all likelihood, most of your board is going to survive this while you're going to be taking out quite a bit of your opponent's smaller stuff, and then you're going to get a bunch more food tokens off of it because you're just going to have a bunch of creatures left over that didn't die in the sweep. And the last 2 cards are basically the same card, but they're in 2 different colors, and they are very, very expensive right now. But I really recommend them if you're going to run the deck because you get multiple copies of our tokens as we go along. And the first, of course, is Parallel Lives for 3 and a green. Enchantment, if in effect we put 1 or more tokens into the battlefield under your control, put twice that many instead onto the battlefield. And then it's Brother, Anointed Procession, 3 and a white. Enchantment, if in effect would do the same thing, creates twice that many instead. So basically they've shifted it out of the green into the white color spectrum for the token doubling, and then we're going to go ahead and put both of them in this deck to really pump out the tokens, get a lot of benefits here, and just go ham with our tokens. So those are my recommendations for things to cut out of this deck to make them better. And as I said before in the other video, land-based fixing is actually probably the biggest thing to fix a deck when it comes to these precons. Go ahead and insert your duels and shocks and pains and everything else that you might have in your collection and fix your mana base, and the deck will run a lot smoother than just straight out of the box. With that said, I'll be working on the next video here, and I will see you then.